Well, good day, everybody. We're taking a break from Genesis, and we're looking at Job now because they believe this is about the time that Job would have been written. Obviously, Job was written before Genesis, but Genesis is a giving an account of the history. So it's in this point that we see Job going through his experience. The thing that I want to point out here is how Job, it was really the accuser of the brethren that we should note here had to give answer to Yahweh, and it says that all the divine beings had to come before God, and the accuser was one of them. And we see this as a situation even right through the history of Israel. And we see him again standing before God, bringing accusation. During the time when the remnant is returning from Babylon and Jerusalem is being reestablished. And Joshua was the high priest. And the prophet had a vision of the accuser standing before the throne. And Joshua was standing before the throne, and the accuser was throwing accusations at Joshua, which weren't false accusations. They were correct accusations. But God told him to shut his mouth, and he told somebody to bring new clothes for Joshua, because this was God's grace. It didn't matter what Joshua had done. God was covering this, and he clothed him in the priestly garments. Then if we fast forward to John's revelation, as we read in Revelation, we see a point where John had the vision where Satan was actually cast away from the presence of God. So right up until the Old Testament, we have Satan having to give account to God and standing there bringing accusation, accusing. And the angels rejoiced when Satan was cast out from the presence, because they were tired of the accusations. They were tired, and they rejoiced that the accuser of brethren had been cast down. And so we have to be careful that as we read through the Old Testament, that we understand that everything changed with Jesus. That as we read this, it's not the same situation. It's a new covenant that we're in. It's also a whole new setup in the what's going on in the spiritual realm. And we can't read ourselves as being a Job, because we're not a Job at all. Man, I grew up in an age where people saw themselves as Jobs and going through those situations, and we're not. We are victorious, and we have to read the Old Testament to see Dad's heart and the relationship, and we see it here because Dad is proud of Job. He's bragging about Job, and the accuser wants to attack Job in two places, because he thinks that's where Job's that's why Job is so righteous in his actions towards God. And so he saw these positions as weakness, and it was possession and health is what we were looking at. Possession and health. But the thing is that Jesus taught us about this. He taught us that these are no longer our weaknesses. And they weren't weaknesses for Job, because Job's love for God, his adoration was so much more. We read that when he was attacked in these areas, he fell to the ground and worshipped. And Jesus tells us that that's our priority as well, because he told us not to lay up treasures for ourselves on this earth. He taught us to stand strong against allowing possessions to possess us. He told us to lay up our treasures in heaven, and our treasures in heaven are those things that we do that we can't be paid back for. So when we do for something for somebody who is not in a place to be able to pay us back for that thing, if you invite a brother or sister over for a meal and they in turn around and invite you, that's fantastic. That's righteous. That's great. That's called fellowship, and we need that. But when you invite a neighbor over who's in a situation that they have nothing to their name, if you go and feed the homeless, you do things for people that they have no way of paying you back, that's laying up treasures in heaven. You will get your reward later. So this is the mentality that we're supposed to have. This is the priority of the kingdom. The kingdom is not an accumulation of wealth on this earth, but there's nothing wrong with the wealth on this earth. It's just not our priority. It's a tool. It can't possess us. It's not allowed to possess us because we are possessed by the Holy Spirit. And nothing is allowed to take priority over God, just as Job did not allow anything to take priority in his relationship with God. And then Jesus teaches us about the self-sacrificing love. And this deals with the second point about, wanting to preserve our life. And Jesus taught that if we try to save our life, we'll lose it. But if we lose our life, then we will gain it. And the whole idea again is to live as Christ. So our whole purpose of living is Christ. There's no other reason for us to even have air in our lungs. Those of us who are followers of Jesus, He is our life, and to die is gain. We get now to start our eternity with Him, and so that's supposed to be our mentality. It's a self-sacrificing love where Jesus says that the greatest act of love is to lay your life down for a friend. And that's how we're supposed to live our life. And we all know that there's different ways of laying down our life. It's not just a giving up of our life. It's a laying it down. It's saying no to ourselves. It's saying no to our rights and such, and living a life of sacrifice that way. So this is really what fortifies us against the enemy ever being able to bring accusation against us. But even if he does bring accusation against us, we're covered by the blood. So it's not the same situation that Job was in at all. Because the accusation, the enemy can't bring accusation. That's been taken away from him. There is because sin has been removed. We're not under the accusation of sin anymore. So the enemy can't bring that against us. It's been covered by the blood. So this is the reason why we are more than conquerors. This is why we have such boldness and confidence to come into the throne room. We have this because this is who we are, because this is who Jesus made us to be. So we can't afford to see ourselves in a position like Job at all. And as we read through this, we have to keep this in mind. There's nobody who can accuse us of anything. And Paul writes about that. There's nobody who can accuse us of anything because it's all covered by the blood of the Lamb, all dealt with. And that's why we are such strong and mighty and incredible people, because all that matters is what God thinks of us, what our Father thinks of us. And as Bill talks about, we can't have a thought in we can't afford to have a thought in our head about us that God doesn't have in His head about us. So it's what He says that matters. That's what matters. That's why our identity matters. So we don't identify with a Job. We identify with Jesus Christ. Remember that. And that's the danger of reading through the Old Testament. So many people are trying to live the new Old Testament. They've just reworded it a bit, but it still comes down to the same thing. And that's not who we are at all. So I encourage you to keep that in mind. So you guys be blessed today. Be encouraged, be engaged, and remember, you're a child of God, and nobody can bring any accusation against you at all, because it's all gone. God bless.